What's the craziest thing you've ever experienced in a long-distance relationship? For 3 years, I was dating someone I'd never actually met. His name was Gabriel. We'd connected through a photography forum when I was 19, bonding over compositions and lighting techniques. What started as casual comments turned into hours-long video calls every night. He lived in Portland. I was in Philadelphia. We talked about everything. Our childhoods, our dreams, the weird foods we hated. He showed me his apartment, his cat Winston, the coffee shop where he worked. I showed me my cramped studio, my collection of vintage cameras, the view from my fire escape. We fell in love the way people do when distance makes every word matter. But here's the thing. Gabriel refused to meet in person. At first, it made sense. Money was tight for both of us. Flights were expensive. We were young and broke, working retail jobs while pursuing our passions. Then I got a photography gig in Seattle, just 3 hours from Portland. Perfect timing, I thought. I texted him immediately about visiting. His response came hours later. "I'm so sorry. My anxiety has been really bad lately. Big crowds, travel, it's overwhelming right now. Can we wait a bit?" I understood. Mental health struggles were real. I didn't push. 6 months later, I had another opportunity. A wedding shoot in Vancouver required me to drive right through Portland. I could stop for dinner, just one meal together after years of screens between us. Gabriel's excuse was different this time. His grandmother was sick. He needed to be available for family emergencies. Couldn't commit to plans. Red flags were waving, but I ignored them because his voice was so sincere, his explanations so detailed. Besides, we video called constantly. I knew his face better than my own reflection. I'd watched him cook dinner, seen him sleepy at 2 a.m., heard him laugh until he couldn't breathe. How could someone fake that level of intimacy? By year 3, my friends were concerned. My sister sat me down one night and asked the question I'd been avoiding. What if he's catfishing you? What if Gabriel isn't real? I defended him fiercely. We video called regularly. I'd seen his entire life through that camera, but doubt had planted itself deep. I decided to surprise him. Booked a flight to Portland without warning, found his address from an envelope he'd once shown me on camera. My hands shook as the plane descended. This was crazy, showing up unannounced. But 3 years deserved at least one real conversation. His apartment building was exactly as he'd described. 4th floor, corner unit, green door. I knocked, my heart hammering. A woman answered. Mid-50s, tired eyes, wearing scrubs. "I'm looking for Gabriel," I said. Her face went pale. "How do you know that name?" "I'm his girlfriend," I managed. "We've been together for 3 years. She stepped back like I'd struck her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Gabriel died 4 years ago. He was my son." The photographs on the walls showed a young man with Gabriel's face, frozen at age 22. My Gabriel would be 26 now. She explained how her son had been killed by a drunk driver coming home from his coffee shop shift, how she'd kept his apartment exactly as he left it, how his laptop was still in his room. "Someone's been using his accounts," she said, voice cracking. "I reported it months ago, but police said it wasn't a priority." My phone buzzed. A text from Gabriel. "Hey, beautiful, can't wait for our call tonight." The woman stared at the screen, then at me, horror spreading across her face. That's when I heard it. Footsteps from the bedroom. The bedroom door opened slowly. A teenage boy emerged, maybe 15 or 16, with the same bone structure as Gabriel, but younger, softer. He froze when he saw us, his face draining of color. The phone in his hand was lighting up with notifications. "Mom," he said quietly. His voice cracked on the word. The woman, Gabriel's mother, turned to him with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of betrayal and disbelief so profound it physically hurt to witness. "What did you do?" she whispered. The boy, Gabriel's younger brother, I realized, started backing toward the bedroom. "I can explain. You've been pretending to be your dead brother?" Her voice was rising now. "For how long? How long have you been using his accounts?" I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this scene unfold from somewhere far away. 3 years of my life, 3 years of falling asleep to video calls, of planning a future together, of believing I knew someone completely. And it had been a child. A kid playing dress-up in his dead brother's digital clothes. Since the funeral, he admitted, tears streaming down his face. I just wanted to feel close to him again. His accounts were still active and people kept messaging, asking where he went. So I responded, just to keep him alive a little longer. Gabriel's mother sank onto the couch, her hands covering her face. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea how sick this is?" I found my voice finally. The video calls. I saw Gabriel. I saw him moving, talking, laughing. The boy wiped his eyes. Deep fake software. I have hundreds of hours of Gabriel's old videos, his voice, his mannerisms. I trained an AI model on everything. It took me 6 months to get it right, but once I did, nobody could tell the difference. My stomach turned. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every whispered "I love you" had been generated by a computer, puppeteered by a grieving teenager who'd been 12 when his brother died. "There were others," he continued, his voice small. "Not just you. 5 different people across different platforms. I thought if I could make Gabriel matter to people again, if I could make him real to someone, then maybe he wouldn't really be gone." Gabriel's mother stood abruptly. "Get out," she said to her son. "Get out of this apartment right now. Mom, please. You've been living in here? In his space? Using his things to manipulate people? She was shaking, her voice breaking on every word. Your brother is dead. He's been dead for 4 years. And you've turned his memory into some kind of sick game. It wasn't a game, the boy sobbed. I missed him. I still miss him every single day. So did I, she screamed. So did I. But I didn't violate his memory. I didn't use his identity to lie to innocent people. She turned to me, her eyes red. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I knew someone was using his accounts, but I never imagined. I should have said something. Should have demanded answers, or yelled, or broken down. Instead, I just stood there, my mind cataloging every moment of the past 3 years, recontextualizing each memory through this new, horrible lens. The way Gabriel never wanted to meet. The way his stories about work never quite added up. The way he'd sometimes reference things that hadn't happened yet, or forget details he should have known. How many hours had this kid spent studying his dead brother's life, learning to imitate his speech patterns, crafting responses that would keep us all believing? It was dedicated in a way that made my skin crawl. I need to go, I heard myself say. Wait, the boy called out as I headed for the door. Please, can I just explain? I turned back. He looked so young standing there in clothes too big for his frame, probably Gabriel's clothes. Explain what? That you stole 3 years of my life? That you made me fall in love with a ghost? I loved my brother, he said desperately. Everything I told you about him was true. His favorite foods, his sense of humor, the way he saw the world. I kept him accurate. I kept him real. He wasn't real, I said flatly. That's the entire point. Your brother died and you used his corpse as a puppet. Gabriel's mother was crying silently on the couch now, her whole body shaking. I walked out, closing the green door behind me for the last time. The flight back to Philadelphia was a blur. I sat in the window seat, staring at clouds, trying to process what had happened. My phone kept buzzing with messages. From my sister asking how the surprise visit went. From my best friend wanting to know if I'd finally met him. From Gabriel's account. I blocked the number without reading the messages. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and started going through everything. 3 years of chat logs, emails, voice messages, video calls, thousands of hours of conversation. I'd saved it all because it felt precious, worth preserving. Now it felt like evidence of my own stupidity. I called my sister at 2 a.m. She answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep. You were right, I said. About everything. I told her the whole story while she listened in silence. When I finished, she said, I'm coming over. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Nobody should process this alone. She arrived 30 minutes later with ice cream and sleeping pills. We stayed up until dawn, going through every red flag I'd missed, every excuse I'd accepted, every moment I'd chosen to believe instead of question. The guilt was overwhelming. How could I have been so blind, so desperate for connection that I'd ignored obvious signs? But that wasn't fair, my sister said firmly. You didn't do anything wrong. You trusted someone. That's not a character flaw. I trusted a computer program controlled by a child. You trusted what you thought was a person, she corrected, and you had video calls. Anyone would have believed it. Still, the shame sat heavy in my chest. I'd told people about Gabriel. My coworkers knew about him. My parents had asked when they'd finally meet my long-distance boyfriend. I'd defended our relationship to everyone who'd questioned it, insisted that physical proximity didn't define love, and I'd been defending a lie the entire time. The next week was mechanical. I went to work, came home, slept, repeated. My boss noticed I was off and gently suggested I take a few personal days. I spent them in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out who I was now. So much of my identity for the past 3 years had been wrapped up in being Gabriel's girlfriend, planning our eventual meeting, imagining our future. Now there was just this hollow space where those dreams used to live. My phone rang on day 5. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Gabriel's mother. Her voice was exhausted. I got your number from my son's phone. I hope that's okay. It's fine, I said, sitting up. I wanted to apologize again, and to explain, if you'll let me. I didn't respond, so she continued. My son Tobias, he's been in therapy since Gabriel died. Severe depression, complicated grief. He tried to take his own life twice. The doctor said he couldn't process the loss, that he was stuck in denial. She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. I knew he was spending time in Gabriel's apartment. I thought it was helping him cope, being close to his brother's things. I had no idea what he was really doing. I should have felt sympathy. She'd lost one son and was watching the other spiral. But all I felt was emptiness. He's been institutionalized, she continued. Full-time care at a psychiatric facility. They think he created these relationships because he couldn't accept that Gabriel was gone. If he could keep Gabriel alive online, then maybe it wasn't real. I found my voice. There were 5 of us, you said. 5 people he was doing this to. Yes. I've been trying to contact everyone, but most of the accounts are deleted or blocked. You're the only one who's talked to me. Do you know who the others were? She hesitated. A girl in Australia who thought Gabriel was her best friend. A man in Texas who believed they were business partners. A woman in Toronto who was planning to move to Portland to be with him. And a teenager in Florida who thought Gabriel was his mentor, helping him through family problems. My chest tightened. 5 different people, 5 different versions of Gabriel, all carefully crafted to give us exactly what we needed. What Tobias thought we needed. The woman in Toronto, I said slowly. Did she come to Portland too? She showed up 3 months ago. That's actually how I found out. She came to the apartment building and the landlord called me. But by the time I got there, Tobias had already talked to her, told her Gabriel had moved away unexpectedly. She believed him. Why didn't you report it then? I did, she said, frustration bleeding through. I told the police everything. They said it was a family matter, that no actual crime had been committed since Tobias never asked for money or personal information. They told me to change the passwords and move on. But you couldn't change the passwords. No, she admitted, because Tobias had set up everything through encrypted accounts and proxy servers. He taught himself advanced computer programming just to keep this going. The police said they could get a warrant, go through proper channels, but it would take months and probably wouldn't result in any charges. Meanwhile, Tobias was actively suicidal. I had to prioritize his mental health. I understood the position she'd been in, sort of, but understanding didn't erase the damage. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. That Gabriel would be horrified if he knew what Tobias had done in his name. My oldest son was kind and honest, and would never have hurt anyone intentionally. I know, I said, and realized I meant it. The real Gabriel, from what I could piece together from his mother's stories and his brother's imitation, seemed like he'd been a good person, which somehow made it worse. After we hung up, I did something I'd been avoiding. I searched for Gabriel's obituary online, found it immediately, along with news articles about the accident. The drunk driver had run a red light, T-boning Gabriel's car on the passenger side. He'd died at the scene. He'd been 22, working 2 jobs to save for photography school, living in the apartment his grandmother had left him when she passed. The comments on his obituary were heartbreaking. Friends describing his laugh, his talent behind the camera, his habit of making everyone feel seen. His mother had posted a photo of him at his high school graduation, grinning with his arm around a younger boy. Tobias obviously looking at his brother with absolute adoration. I spent hours going down rabbit holes, finding Gabriel's real social media accounts from before he died. His actual Instagram was still up, frozen in time. The last post was from the morning of the accident. A sunrise photo he'd taken from his fire escape, caption reading, "Magic hour never disappoints." The comments below were a mix of old friends saying it was beautiful, and recent posts from people who'd clearly just found out about his death, expressing shock and condolences years too late. I scrolled through his photos. His real life, his real friends, his actual cat Winston, who I recognized from the video calls, meaning Tobias must have been using Gabriel's apartment and Gabriel's pet for authenticity. That night, I finally let myself cry. Not for the relationship I'd lost because that had never existed, but for the person Gabriel had actually been, someone who died too young, whose memory had been twisted by grief into something he never would have wanted. My sister found me on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., surrounded by printed photos of Gabriel I'd found online. She didn't say anything, just sat down next to me and held my hand while I sobbed. I fell in love with a ghost, I choked out. No, she said firmly. You fell in love with what you thought was a person. That's normal. That's human. What happened to you was trauma, not stupidity. But I should have known. How? She demanded. You video called. You saw him. You heard his voice. You can't blame yourself for not predicting that a grieving teenager would create an AI deepfake of his dead brother. She had a point. But it didn't stop the shame that burned in my chest every time I thought about telling someone what had happened. The humiliation of admitting I'd spent 3 years dating pixels on a screen, manipulated by a 15-year-old. I took a leave from work, 2 weeks that turned into a month. I couldn't focus on anything. My boss was understanding, telling me to take all the time I needed. My coworkers sent care packages and concerned texts. But I couldn't explain what had happened. Every time I tried to put it into words, they sounded insane. My therapist's office became my safe space. She was the only person besides my sister who knew the full story. We spent sessions unpacking the layers of deception, the grief for a relationship that never existed, the violation of having my emotions manipulated so precisely. What Tobias did was a form of abuse, she told me during week 3. He took advantage of your kindness and your capacity for love. That's on him, not you. But I chose to believe, I argued. Every red flag, every missed meeting, every excuse. I chose to accept them. Because you trusted, she countered. Trust isn't a weakness. And someone with bad intentions exploited that trust. That's the definition of manipulation. I started journaling, pages and pages of memories, trying to separate what had been real from what had been fabricated. The conversations about photography were probably genuine. Gabriel had been a photographer. Tobias would have access to his brother's knowledge, his opinions, his style preferences. But the conversations about our future, those had been pure fiction. Tobias creating a fantasy life for a brother who would never have one. The hardest part was the video calls. I'd watched Gabriel laugh, watched him eat dinner, watched him fall asleep during late-night conversations. The AI had been that good. Or maybe I'd just been that desperate to believe. My sister convinced me to join a support group for victims of online deception. I sat in a circle with 8 other people, listening to their stories. A woman who'd sent $50,000 to a man claiming to be a soldier overseas. A man who'd been catfished by someone using his ex-wife's photos. A teenager who'd believed their online best friend was dying of cancer for 2 years. When it was my turn to share, I almost couldn't get the words out. But once I started, everything poured out. The 3 years, the video calls, the deepfake, the dead brother, the grieving teenager. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the woman next to me reached over and squeezed my hand. That's the most elaborate catfish I've ever heard, she said gently. And I've heard some doozies. It shouldn't have been comforting, but it was. I wasn't alone in this. Other people had been deceived, manipulated, made to feel foolish for trusting. We were a club nobody wanted to join, but at least we had each other. Months passed. I went back to work, started accepting photography jobs again, slowly rebuilt the parts of myself that had existed before Gabriel. My sister checked in daily, making sure I was eating, sleeping, leaving the apartment. My parents flew in for a weekend, pretending not to notice the dark circles under my eyes or the way I flinched every time my phone buzzed. I was getting better, or at least I was getting functional. Then I got a letter. Physical mail forwarded from my old address. The return address was a psychiatric facility in Oregon. I knew before opening it who it was from. Tobias had written me a letter. 12 pages, front and back, in cramped handwriting. I almost threw it away unopened, but something made me sit down on my couch and read. He started with an apology. Paragraphs of, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I never meant to hurt anyone." He explained his grief, how losing Gabriel had shattered his world, how their father had left when Tobias was 8, making Gabriel not just a brother, but a father figure. How Gabriel had been his best friend, his protector, his hero. When Gabriel died, Tobias wrote, "I died too, but nobody noticed because I was still breathing." He described the funeral, how he'd felt nothing, the months of numbness that followed. The first time he'd logged into Gabriel's accounts and seen unread messages from people who didn't know he was dead yet. The impulse to respond, just once, just to feel close to his brother again. One response turned into a conversation. One conversation turned into a relationship. Before I knew it, he wrote, "I was living my brother's life for him, the life he should have had." He explained the technical details, how he'd downloaded software designed for movie special effects, how he'd fed it hundreds of hours of home videos, creating a dataset large enough to generate realistic deepfakes, how he'd practiced for months before the AI could mimic Gabriel's mannerisms convincingly. "It started as a way to grieve," he wrote. "But then I realized I could make Gabriel matter again. All these people who'd never known him, they could love him the way I loved him. He could impact lives even though he was gone." The rationalization made my skin crawl. He'd convinced himself that what he was doing was some kind of tribute, a way to honor his brother's memory, not acknowledging that he was actively traumatizing real people in the process. The letter's tone shifted about halfway through. He started talking about me specifically, how I'd been different from the others, how our conversations had felt real to him, even though he knew they shouldn't, how he'd sometimes forget he was pretending, caught up in the photography discussions we'd have. "You made me feel like Gabriel was really there," he wrote. "Like I wasn't just talking to myself. You understood him in a way that made me remember why I loved him so much." I wanted to crumple the letter, wanted to scream that I'd never understood Gabriel because I'd never known Gabriel. I'd known an AI puppet show directed by a disturbed teenager, but I kept reading. Toward the end, Tobias wrote about his hospitalization, the intensive therapy, the diagnosis of complicated grief disorder complicated by depression, anxiety, and what his doctors called identity diffusion. He was on medication now. He'd been in the facility for 6 months, with at least another year ahead of him. "I know I can't undo what I did," he wrote. "I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that Gabriel would have liked you. The real Gabriel, I mean. You have the same way of seeing the world that he did, the same passion for capturing moments." He ended the letter with a request. "Could you forgive me? Not now, maybe not ever. But someday?" I set the letter down and sat in silence for a long time. Could I forgive him? Should I? My therapist said forgiveness was for me, not for him, that it was about releasing the anger and resentment that was poisoning my healing process. But how do you forgive someone for stealing 3 years of your life, for making you fall in love with a dead person? I didn't respond to the letter, didn't know what I'd say if I tried. Instead, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I went through all my photos of Gabriel, the screenshots from video calls, the selfies he'd sent, the candid moments I'd captured, and I deleted them, every single one. It felt like a second funeral, mourning someone who'd never existed while simultaneously erasing all evidence that I'd believed in him. My sister came over that night and found me staring at my empty camera roll. "Are you okay?" she asked carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like I should be relieved. Like deleting everything should feel freeing, but it just feels empty. Because you're grieving," she said, sitting beside me. "You're allowed to grieve even though the relationship wasn't real. Your feelings were real. Your love was real. That matters." "Does it?" I asked. "If everything else was fake, do my real feelings even count?" She grabbed my hands, forcing me to look at her. "Yes," she said fiercely. "Your capacity to love, to trust, to open your heart to someone, that's real. That's the most real thing about this entire situation. Don't let what he did make you doubt that." I started crying then. Not the quiet, numb tears I'd been shedding for months, but loud, gasping sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. My sister held me while I fell apart, whispering that I was going to be okay, that I was stronger than I knew, that this wouldn't break me. She was right. It didn't break me, but it changed me. I became more cautious about online relationships, more suspicious of people's intentions. My therapist said it was natural, a protective response to trauma, but I hated it. Hated that Tobias had taken my ability to trust and shattered it so completely that I second-guessed every interaction. I went on a date 6 months after Portland. A photographer I'd met at a gallery opening. He was kind, funny, easy to talk to. We had dinner, walked through the city, talked about art and light and the way shadows could tell stories. It should have been perfect. But when he asked if I wanted to exchange numbers, I froze. My mind started spiraling. What if he wasn't who he claimed to be? What if this was another elaborate deception? What if I was being foolish again? I gave him a fake number and never saw him again. My sister was furious when I told her. "You can't let Tobias win," she said. "You can't let what he did stop you from living." "I'm not letting him win," I argued. "I'm protecting myself." "No," she countered. "You're punishing yourself. You're treating your capacity for love like it's a weakness instead of a strength." She was right. Again. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. I threw myself into work, took on more photography jobs than I could handle, weddings, portraits, commercial shoots, anything to keep busy, to avoid thinking. My portfolio grew, my reputation strengthened, clients started specifically requesting me. On the surface, I was thriving. Underneath, I was hollow. A year after Portland, I got another letter. Same handwriting, same return address. I stared at it for 3 days before opening. Tobias had been released from inpatient care. He was living with his mother now, attending outpatient therapy 3 times a week. He'd been taking classes online, trying to finish high school. He wanted to study computer science in college, maybe work in ethical AI development. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd written to update me on his progress, to tell me he thought about what he'd done every single day, that he'd contacted the other 4 people he'd deceived, though only one had responded. He was trying to make amends, even though he knew that was impossible. At the end of the letter, he included something unexpected, a flash drive. On this drive, he wrote, "Are all the real photos and videos I have of Gabriel, not the AI stuff, real memories." I thought maybe you'd want to see who he actually was. Not the version I created, but the person he really was before he died. I held the flash drive like it might explode. Did I want to see? Did I want to know the real Gabriel? After everything? Would it make things better or worse? I waited another week before plugging it in. The drive was organized meticulously, folders sorted by year, each containing hundreds of photos and videos. I started with the most recent folder, the year Gabriel died. There he was. The face I'd loved, but different. More real. These photos weren't carefully posed or filtered. They were candid shots of life. Gabriel laughing with friends at a bar. Gabriel climbing rocks at some state park. Gabriel asleep on a couch with Winston curled on his chest. Gabriel making faces at the camera while Tobias, behind it, giggled in the audio. I spent hours going through everything. Watched videos of family dinners where Gabriel would tease Tobias mercilessly but with obvious affection. Saw photos from camping trips, holidays, random Tuesday afternoons. This was a life. A real full life that had been cut short. And I'd never known him. The thought sat heavy in my chest. I'd spent 3 years believing I loved this person, but I'd only loved the fiction Tobias had created. The real Gabriel was a stranger. Seeing his actual life, his real relationships, his genuine moments made that painfully clear. But it also made me angry, because Gabriel had been a person, someone with family who loved him, friends who missed him, a future that had been stolen, and Tobias had reduced him to a manipulation tool, had used his brother's death as a way to fulfill his own emotional needs without considering the damage he was causing. I closed the laptop and called my therapist. It was 10 p.m., but she'd told me to contact her anytime if I needed to process something urgent. She answered on the 3rd ring. "What's wrong?" "I saw the real Gabriel," I said. "And I'm so angry I can't breathe." We talked for 90 minutes. She helped me understand that anger was good. Anger meant I was moving past the numbness, past the self-blame. Anger meant I was holding Tobias accountable for his actions instead of making excuses for him. By the time we hung up, I'd made a decision. I wrote Tobias back. Only 1 page this time, my handwriting sharp and deliberate. I told him I'd seen the photos, that the real Gabriel seemed like a good person who didn't deserve what Tobias had done to his memory. I told him I understood grief, understood trauma, understood that pain makes people do irrational things. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness. I explained that what he'd done was abuse, that he'd stolen 3 years of my life, made me doubt my own judgment, and traumatized me in ways I was still unpacking. That his grief didn't excuse the harm he'd caused 5 different people who'd done nothing wrong except be vulnerable online. I told him I hoped his therapy helped, that I hoped he found a way to honor Gabriel's memory that didn't involve violating other people's trust. But I also told him never to contact me again. "I will not forgive you," I wrote. "Not now, not someday. What you did was unforgivable, and I refuse to absolve you just so you can feel better about yourself. Live with what you did. Let it shape you into someone who would never hurt people this way again. But leave me out of your healing process." I mailed it that afternoon before I could second-guess myself. The relief was immediate. I'd spent so much time being sad, being broken, being angry at myself. Finally directing that anger where it belonged, at Tobias, felt like lifting a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. My therapist was proud. My sister was ecstatic. Even my parents, who'd been worried about me for over a year, noticed the shift. I wasn't healed. Not even close. But I was fighting back now instead of just surviving. I started dating again. Cautiously, carefully, with clear boundaries. I'd tell potential partners up front that I'd been catfished, that I had trust issues we'd need to work through. Most people were understanding. The ones who weren't did me the favor of showing themselves out early. I met Dominic at a coffee shop. He was a graphic designer with kind eyes and a self-deprecating sense of humor. We talked for 3 hours on our first date, and when he asked if he could see me again, I said yes without hesitation. It wasn't love at first sight. It was slow and careful and sometimes scary. There were nights I'd panic, convinced he was lying about something. Times I'd check his social media obsessively, looking for proof he was real. But Dominic was patient. He'd answer my questions without getting defensive. He'd introduce me to his friends and family. He'd show me his driver's license or passport when my anxiety spiked. He met my sister after 3 months. She interrogated him for an hour while I watched nervously. When he left, she hugged me tight and said, "He's real, and he's good." I cried from relief. 2 years after Portland, I was in a healthy relationship, thriving in my career, and learning to trust again. The trauma hadn't disappeared, but I'd learned to carry it differently. It wasn't crushing me anymore. It was just part of my history. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Old habits dying hard, but something made me pick up. It was Gabriel's mother. I recognized her voice immediately, even though we hadn't spoken since that one phone call years ago. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice shaking. "I know you asked not to be contacted, but something's happened and I thought you should know." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Tobias is missing," she said. "He left a note saying he couldn't live with what he'd done anymore. The police are searching, but it's been 4 days. I'm calling everyone he might have reached out to." I sat down heavily. Has he contacted the others? The other 4 people? 2 of them. They haven't heard from him. I can't reach the other 2. She paused. "I know it's not your responsibility. I know you owe us nothing. But if he contacts you, please, just let me know he's alive. I'll call you if I hear anything," I said, and hung up. Dominic found me staring at my phone 20 minutes later. "What's wrong?" I told him everything. About Tobias, about the letter I'd sent refusing forgiveness, about the guilt that was now eating me alive. Had my anger pushed him over the edge? Was this my fault? "No," Dominic said firmly. "This is not on you. You set boundaries. You protected yourself. What he does with his pain is his choice, not your responsibility. But what if he kills himself? What if my letter was the final straw? Then that's tragic," Dominic said gently. "But it's still not your fault. You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially someone who burned you first." I knew he was right, but the guilt persisted. 3 days later, Gabriel's mother called again. They'd found Tobias. He'd been staying in a motel 2 states over, having what his doctors called a dissociative episode. He was back in psychiatric care, in serious but stable condition. I thanked her for letting me know and hung up feeling empty. Not relieved, not vindicated, just empty. My therapist helped me process it during our next session. Tobias's mental health struggles were real and serious, she confirmed, but they didn't erase the harm he'd caused. I could feel sympathy for his pain while still maintaining that he'd traumatized me. Both things could be true. It took time, but I made peace with it. With the situation, with Tobias, with myself. Not forgiveness, exactly. More like acceptance. This thing had happened to me. It had damaged me, and I was rebuilding anyway. 3 years after Portland, Dominic proposed. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony surrounded by people who loved us. Real people, whose faces I'd touched, whose presence was undeniable. During the reception, my sister pulled me aside. "You did it," she said, tears in her eyes. "You survived and you're thriving." "I am," I agreed, looking at my husband laughing with my parents. "I really am." But that night, alone in our hotel room, I found myself thinking about Gabriel, the real one, the 22-year-old who'd died taking sunset photos, who'd never gotten to pursue photography school or fall in love or have a wedding of his own. I pulled up the flash drive Tobias had sent years ago, looked through those photos one more time. Gabriel playing with Winston, Gabriel hugging his little brother, Gabriel behind a camera, capturing his own view of the world. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the image on my screen. "Sorry that you died. Sorry that your memory was twisted. Sorry that I fell in love with a ghost wearing your face." Then I closed the laptop and crawled into bed beside my husband, my real, present, solid husband, who was definitely, undeniably alive. The trauma had changed me, made me more cautious, more guarded, but it hadn't destroyed my capacity for love, hadn't stolen my ability to trust. Tobias had tried to break me, even if unintentionally, but I'd survived. And more than that, I'd healed. 4 years after Portland, I got one final letter from Tobias. He was out of the facility again, working at a tech company that specialized in AI ethics. He'd created a nonprofit that educated people about deepfake technology and online deception. He was trying, in his own way, to prevent others from causing the damage he'd caused. He didn't ask for forgiveness this time, didn't ask for anything. Just wanted me to know he was dedicating his life to making sure what he'd done to 5 people would never happen to anyone else. "I appreciate what you're doing," I wrote back. "This was the last time. I mean it when I say never contact me again. But I hope your work helps people." I mailed it and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not relief, just closure. That evening, Dominic found me on our balcony, watching the sunset. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said, leaning back into him. "I really am." And I was. The scars were still there, would probably always be there, but they'd faded from raw wounds to silver lines, proof that I'd survived something terrible and come out stronger. 3 years of my life had been stolen by a grieving teenager and a sophisticated AI, but I'd gotten myself back, reclaimed my ability to love, to trust, to believe in connection. Gabriel was gone, the fake Gabriel was deleted, and I was here, alive, present, real. That was enough. 5 years after Portland, my sister called with news. She'd been contacted by a journalist writing about catfishing and online deception. Someone had referred the journalist to my story, though my sister didn't know who. "Do you want to talk to them?" she asked. "It might help other people who've gone through something similar." I thought about it for a long time. There was something powerful about sharing trauma, about turning pain into purpose. But there was also something to be said for privacy, for keeping some wounds sacred. "I'll think about it," I told her. That night, I talked it over with Dominic. He didn't push either way, just listened while I worked through my thoughts out loud. "If I tell this story," I said slowly, "it might help people understand how sophisticated online deception can be. How it's not just about being stupid or naive, how it can happen to anyone." "That's true," he agreed. "But it also means reliving it, putting myself out there, possibly being judged by people who think they would have known better." "Also true," he said. "What does your gut tell you?" My gut said no, not yet, maybe not ever. I'd healed by processing privately, by working through it with people I trusted. I didn't need public validation or vindication. "I'm not ready," I told my sister the next day. "Maybe someday, but not now." She understood. That journalist ended up writing the article anyway, interviewing the woman from Toronto and the man from Texas. Both of them had gone public with their experiences, advocating for better protections against deepfake technology. I read the article when it published, saw my story mentioned briefly, anonymously. The journalist had done their homework, explaining how Tobias had used grief as a weapon, how AI had made his deception possible on a scale that wouldn't have been feasible just years before. The comments section was brutal. People calling the victims stupid, saying they should have known better. Others defending them, pointing out the sophistication of the technology. A few people sharing their own stories of being deceived online. I closed the article and didn't look at it again. Other people could have that conversation. I was done. 6 years after Portland, I got pregnant. Holding my daughter for the first time, I felt a rush of fierce protectiveness. This tiny human would grow up in a world where AI could convincingly impersonate the dead, where online relationships could be entirely fabricated, where trust was becoming increasingly difficult to verify. How do I protect her from that? I asked Dominic that night, both of us exhausted and overwhelmed. "We teach her to be smart," he said, "but also to be brave. We don't let fear stop her from connecting with people. What if she gets hurt the way I did? Then we'll be there to help her heal," he said simply. "Just like your sister was there for you." It was the right answer. I couldn't bubble wrap my daughter against every possible harm, but I could raise her to be resilient, to trust her instincts, to know that being deceived doesn't make you weak. 7 years after Portland, Tobias's nonprofit made national news. They'd successfully lobbied for legislation requiring deepfake content to be labeled. It was a small victory in a much larger war, but it was something. I saw him on the news, giving an interview about the work. He looked different. Older, more serious, but also healthier than the desperate teenager I'd met in Gabriel's apartment. He talked about his brother, about the guilt he carried every day, about trying to turn his biggest mistake into something meaningful. "I forgave my parents, but I can never forgive myself," he said to the camera. "What I did was unforgivable. All I can do is spend my life making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." I turned off the TV. He was right. It was unforgivable. But at least he'd stopped asking for forgiveness. 8 years after Portland, my daughter said her first word, "Dada," naturally. Dominic cried. I laughed. Life kept moving forward. I barely thought about Gabriel anymore. The fake one or the real one. They'd both become distant memories. Faded photos in an album I rarely opened. But sometimes when I was editing photos from a wedding or a portrait session, I'd catch myself wondering what Gabriel, the real Gabriel, would have thought of the shot. Would he have approved of the composition? The lighting? The way I'd captured a specific moment? It was strange, feeling connection to someone I'd never met. Someone whose memory had been so thoroughly violated that I couldn't separate the real person from the fabrication. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was possible to mourn the life he'd lost while also acknowledging the damage done in his name. Both things could coexist. 9 years after Portland, I was cleaning out storage when I found it. The flash drive Tobias had sent. I'd thought I'd thrown it away years ago, but here it was, buried in a box of old electronics. I should have destroyed it right then. Should have put it through a shredder or smashed it with a hammer. Instead, I plugged it in one last time. The photos were still there. Frozen moments of a life lived fully before being cut short. I looked at them with different eyes now. Not as the person who'd been deceived, but as someone who understood the precious fragility of life. Gabriel had been loved, had loved others, had left a mark on the world, however brief. That mattered. That was real. Even if everything else had been a lie, that truth remained. I copied one photo to my hard drive before deleting the rest. A candid shot of Gabriel laughing, truly, genuinely happy. Then I destroyed the flash drive. That photo lives in a folder on my computer labeled Remember. Not Gabriel specifically, but what he represented. The reminder that people are more than their digital footprints. that love and connection require presence, not just pixels. 10 years after Portland, I wrote this down. All of it. The whole terrible, complicated story. Not for publication, not for anyone else to read, just for me. A way of processing the last decade, seeing how far I'd come. I started with a question. What's the craziest thing you've ever experienced in a long-distance relationship? And I ended with an answer. I fell in love with a ghost, and it almost destroyed me, but I survived. And in surviving, I learned that heartbreak can coexist with healing, that being deceived doesn't make you foolish, that trust, even when violated, is still worth the risk. Gabriel, the real Gabriel, died at 22. He never got the chance to grow old, fall in love, build a life. I did. I do. I am. And maybe that's the best way to honor his memory. Not by dwelling on what was done in his name, but by living fully in his absence. By choosing connection over fear. By trusting again, despite the scars. By remembering that love, even when it's based on lies, still teaches us something true about ourselves. I close the document and save it. Then I go downstairs where Dominic is playing with our daughter, where my real life, my present life, is waiting. The past will always be there. The trauma won't disappear, but it doesn't own me anymore. I survived a long-distance relationship with a dead person, and somehow, impossibly, I'm okay.
So, how did you like this story? If stories like these truly interest you, then this channel is made just for you. Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have any story ideas or topics you'd like us to cover next, share them with us. Because even a single comment from you helps us bring more powerful and meaningful stories. We read every single comment, and your support truly means everything to us. If you enjoyed this Reddit-style family drama and revenge story, please like this video, share it with someone who loves real-life stories, and subscribe to our channel, Trail of Revenge, so we can reach 100,000 subscribers together very soon. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new powerful story from Trail of Revenge. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, have a wonderful day, and we'll meet again in the next video with another unforgettable story.